Hi everyone, Paul Levy with Brownells here, and today we have a special guest, Knox Williams with the ASA, the American Suppressor Association. Yeah.
That's right. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about the Hearing Protection Act primarily. It's a bill at the federal level. We're getting a lot of questions about it. I'm sure you have as well. So we got Knox here to maybe answer some questions about the bill, answer your questions. We're taking them live on Facebook, so shoot us any questions you have, one about suppressors, but also about the HPA itself, any ins and outs, statuses, that sort of thing. We'd be happy to answer any questions. So again, Knox, thanks for joining us.
Paul, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll jump right off into suppressors. We're going to start pretty basic to get everyone up to speed. Just real quick, what's a suppressor for firearms? What is it?
It is a muffler. It is something that allows the hot gases that propel a bullet out of a firearm to cool a little bit more slowly and reduce the noise by, depending on some variables, about 20 to 35 decibels, okay, which is roughly the same reduction that you get with, earplugs and earmuffs and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so most people are pretty familiar with that. You've seen them at the range or in the movies. Maybe clarify the difference between what you see maybe in the media and movies versus what a suppressor actually does.
Sure. So for folks that have never actually seen a suppressor firsthand, there's often this question of, well, what is a suppressor versus a silencer? There are two terms that refer to the same thing.
Yeah.
And, even in our community, there's a big debate of, Hiram Percy Maxim called it a silencer, therefore it's a silencer, and federal law calls it a silencer.
I can't decide myself sometimes.
Yeah, and you're not wrong, but at the end of the day, it's something that doesn't silence the report of a gun. There's no technology that can do that. There's too many noise sources, and physics just will not allow that to happen.
Yeah.
That's why we call it a suppressor.
Okay.
And really one of the big reasons was, we do a lot of legislative work, and we would go and walk into a legislature, whether it's meetings with legislators or committee hearings, and I'd say, hi, my name's Knox Williams with the American Silencer Association. Yeah. By the way, these things don't silence a gun, they're actually suppressors. Yeah. It would kind of confuse a lot of people.
So maybe we should backtrack a bit there too. What's the ASA and what do you guys do?
So we are a nonprofit organization that represents the suppressor community. Our members include manufacturers, distributors like Brownells, dealers, and consumers. And our focus, and our focus since we formed in 2011, has been advancing suppressor education and pro-suppressor advocacy.
All right. So back to suppressors themselves, as far as how they work, you kind of hit on that. They basically trap those expanding gases, slow them down. Yeah. That's pretty much the gist of it?
Yeah.
Can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, so it's the exact same science as the muffler in a car, and Hiram Percy Maxim was actually one of the early inventors of the car muffler. It's the same exact science, and an analogy that we like to use is, if you want to relate it to something, if you have a balloon and you blow it up tight and you pop that balloon with a needle, it's going to make a loud noise because all that energy inside there is getting expanded very quickly. Yeah. If you take that same balloon with the exact same air inside of it and you just let the air out of the end, the same energy is going to disperse, but it's going to be a lot quieter. Yeah. It's the exact same principles at play.
All right. So there you go. If you weren't quite aware of what a suppressor was, that's a pretty quick rundown, very, very quick and to the point. So what are some common myths that people might perpetuate out there, or just a common citizen or consumer out there believe about suppressors?
Sure. So, the most common myth is obviously that, these things are going to silence the report of a gunshot. Yeah. That, I'd be able to pull the trigger on a gun, and if it had a suppressor, no one in this room, you wouldn't even be able to hear it.
That they're for assassins. I heard that
exactly.
in the Senate over here in Iowa.
Exactly. And, even today, there was a senator from New York who took Hillary Clinton's seat, going off on national news media saying, hey, these are assassins' tools. And, sure that she's only ever seen them through James Bond. Yeah. Which is, it's kind of silly to look to Hollywood to try and, figure out your facts on a particular issue.
That's where I find most of my facts is movies. But I'm not the best at that sort of thing. So then what would somebody ideally use a suppressor for? What are the purposes for Joe Schmo, me, to be using a suppressor?
First and foremost, hearing protection. Guns are loud. Everybody knows it. Anybody that's ever shot, even a .22 knows that, hey, these things are pretty loud. And there's a reason why basically any shooting range that you go to requires you to wear hearing protection, whether it's earplugs or earmuffs. Yeah. Frankly, you should be wearing both, regardless of what you're shooting. But suppressors help mitigate that noise. They're the only technology available to reduce it at the source, as opposed to something that, you know, is only going to function for the individual that's wearing it. So suppressors kind of, you know, create this like safety blanket, so to speak, in noise reduction.
The nice thing to do anyways.
It's absolutely. You look across the pond, you know, you look over at Europe, the UK, Scandinavia, New Zealand, South Africa, you know, almost everybody uses suppressors over there because it's just courteous. You know, and it really just makes sense.
All right, and then here we get to the sore spot. When and why did suppressors become so restricted? You can't just, I don't know if people are familiar with it, we can dive into that. You can't just go in and buy a suppressor like I could this JP rifle. What do I got to do today, and why'd they get like that?
So in order to purchase a suppressor, you have to find what's called an SOT, so a federal firearms licensed dealer, a gun dealer, that's also licensed to sell NFA items or National Firearms Act classified items, which suppressors are included in. So you've got to find a suppressor-specific dealer, which there are thousands of them across the country now. You know, 5 years ago that wasn't the case. But you go in, you figure out which suppressor you want to buy. So you can say, you know, I want this suppressor, this Gym Tech 22 suppressor. They will take it and say, you are buying X serial number. We're going to bring what's called an ATF Form 4 out, and you're going to fill that out. And this is going to be, you know, you purchasing this exact suppressor. You fill it out. You include 2 sets of passport photos, fingerprint cards. You pay a $200 tax, which is called a transfer tax.
That's what you hear about all the time, is the tax.
To the ATF. A lot of people think it's, you know, a class 3 license or something like that. It's not. It's technically a transfer tax, kind of similar to buying a duck stamp for your hunting license. But you submit that paperwork to the ATF. ATF is Johnny on the spot with cashing that check. You know, that generally happens within about 10 days to 2 weeks. And they take your application, your Form 4 application, and they put it in a big pile. And it sits, and it sits, and it sits. And then at some point, they take your information, send it over to the FBI. The FBI actually conducts your background check. Which a lot of people think it's some magical, mysterious, like, background check where they're, you know, doing all sorts of stuff, like, you know, going back and figuring out, you know, how you treated your pets in middle school, and you know, who your past 10 landlords were, and all this crazy stuff. But it's pretty much just a NICS check.
It's a basic NICS check.
Yeah, for the most part. You know, they do a little bit more, but really, that's the meat of it. If you pass that FBI background check, they send your information back to the ATF. The ATF says, okay, they passed the background check, make sure everything jives, and you're good to go. And only when the ATF approves your form and send it back to your dealer with that approved form can you then go pick up your suppressor. Right now, that process is taking about 8 months. You know, it fluctuates with the market. You know, as demand increases, so do the wait times, because there's a bottleneck of examiners at the Martinsburg facility where the NFA applications are
And that's
processed.
the system today. You got to get all these. You have to get your paperwork in order, send it off, pay your tax, then you got to go through the wait, and then eventually your shop will get it back, and then that's when you can currently today take possession if you're in a state that allows it. And that's one thing. And before I get too far ahead of myself, we are taking questions. So if you have any questions about the HPA, suppressors, how you buy a suppressor, go ahead and send it our way, and we'll jump to those. We'll actually take a question here first before we get to the HPA itself, and we'll elaborate on that. Jonathan asks, is it a silencer or suppressor? We kind of hit on that real quick, but could you elaborate on that a bit more?
So it's semantics. You know, tomato. When they were invented and patented back in 1909, Hiram Percy Maxim called it the silent firearm. You know, and he marketed it, you know, actually ultimately, debatably to his detriment, as something that would silence the report of a gunshot. You know, and kind of a tangential story, you know, but I think it's somewhat relevant. Teddy Roosevelt loved them. He had a Winchester 1898 that he used with a Maxim suppressor on his estate in Long Island, so that he wouldn't disrupt his neighbors. You know, the Rockefellers and Tiffany's, and you know, the high society. You know, these elite political barons, so to speak. I just always thought that was kind of cool.
You got to keep them, you know, you got to keep them happy.
But
all right, very interesting.
So, you know,
So
they
really
call it
kind of
silencer. You know, if you want to look at it as more of what do these tools actually do. They don't silence, they suppress.
Okay.
So that's kind of the debate, and it really doesn't matter. They're referring to the same thing.
All right. Well, let's get diving in then to, you hit on suppressors throughout the world, but let's dive into suppressors here in the HPA itself. What is the HPA? Elaborate on what it is, what's the status?
Sure. So it's the Hearing Protection Act. It was originally introduced back in October of 2015 by Representative Matt Salmon.
Okay.
It did not make it through last Congress, the 114th, but this year it was reintroduced. Representative Salmon retired. It was reintroduced by Representative Jeff Duncan and Judge Carter as the Duncan-Carter Hearing Protection Act, H.R. 367 in the House. It currently has 121 co-sponsors. It is a bipartisan bill technically, and we're working on adding more Democratic co-sponsors to it as well.
Nice.
And I believe we just broke through the majority of the Republican Party.
Wow.
So we've got a pretty sizable support, and we're working that
So you've probably been spending a lot of time then in D.C. yourself?
Quite a bit, yeah,
okay.
Quite a bit. We've got a lobbyist up there that we're working with, and I would like to say we work hand in hand with groups like the National Rifle Association, the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, NSSF. This is really a team effort. That we're just one spoke on the wheel, so to speak.
Now that's great to hear. So it's at the federal level. It's in the House.
Yep.
Where's it going from here? What's the next steps? What's happening?
So it's also been introduced in the Senate
by
Senator Crapo. I believe it's S59.
Okay.
Almost identical bill. But basically, right now we're working to build up co-sponsorship. So we're trying to add on more support. And right now is really when we're going through and trying to educate as many offices as possible.
Sure.
Because like you said earlier, most people have only ever seen suppressors in the movies. The majority of our legislators are just like us. They've never shot with one. So it's our job to go out and make sure that as many of these legislators hear the facts, and we can take as many of them out as possible to the shooting range.
And a lot of people just aren't aware of the existing process today. I asked a local legislator, actually one of our senators, what they're going to do about it. They had no idea how suppressors were regulated, where to even start. So that's great that awareness is getting out there and hopefully treating them like a firearm and getting them more easily accessible.
Absolutely.
So does the bill include anything else? Can you maybe dive into more of the technical details of how it's structured, or is it pretty straightforward?
Sure. So the bill pretty much aims to take suppressors out of the National Firearms Act.
Okay.
Suppressors have been regulated since 1934 under the NFA, included with things like short-barrel rifles, short-barrel shotguns, machine guns.
So the National Firearms Act was this bill passed in 1934 that included all those things: machine guns, short-barreled rifles, shotguns, and then suppressors were just kind of tossed in there, to my understanding. There wasn't much debate at all, right?
Yeah, so suppressors are the only thing that, if you go back and look at the actual debate record on the National Firearms Act, they were mentioned 2 times, and mentioned very much offhand. There was no debate on suppressors, nothing of significance, whereas you had large debate on everything else. An interesting tidbit is, pistols, handguns were actually included in the National Firearms Act's first draft, where FDR and the Attorney General at the time wanted to basically, place a de facto ban on handguns.
Didn't some of the manufacturers step in and kind of?
I believe they did, and I believe the NRA did as well.
Good.
And the NRA back in 1934 was a lot different than it was today. But I believe that they were one of the primary, responsible parties for saying, like, no, you're not gonna come in and take away handguns like that.
This goes all the way back to 1934, where we're saddled with the $200 tax, all this additional wait times and processing, when it was maybe in fact not even that well debated. It was just kind of thrown in.
It wasn't, and there's a lot of people that say, oh well, these were included because gangland violence, and for machine guns and whatnot, that is absolutely the fact. FDR and his administration wanted to ban guns, and they knew that they didn't have the statutory authority. They knew Congress didn't have the statutory authority, so they did the next best thing, which is levy a $200 tax. You adjust that for inflation, and you're talking a $3,500, $3,600 tax.
A big chunk of change.
That's a lot of money. For something that costs significantly less than that tax. But suppressors were not included in the debate. So really it's speculation as to why they were included, what caught their eye. And it's kind of a great irony that one of their greatest proponents, in Teddy Roosevelt, was undercut so hard by his distant cousin, FDR.
Weird how family works sometimes.
Yeah, it is.
I'm going to expand on, I'm going to jump back to Jonathan's question. He asked a good question earlier. What are you doing to address the fact that the HPA does not address the definition of a silencer in the Gun Control Act and the consequences of that definition remaining?
Sure. That is a great question, and it's something that we've been working on a package of technical amendments. When the bill is heard in committee, and at this point, it will be heard in committee. Okay. It's a question of if, it's a question of when, not if.
So you're going to fix a few things as it goes through the process.
Yep.
You have some plans to address some other items.
We do.
Okay.
We have a full package of technical amendments. We've actually been working hand in hand with the ATF on a lot of this stuff.
Just to make sure when it does go through, if it did, that they couldn't catch you with, oh, got you on this, got you on that.
And we've had enough meetings with ATF, and we'll be the first to tell you that we have a working relationship with them, but a lot of times it's prudent to trust but verify, and trust as far as you can see.
Well, that's great that they're willing to work with you
and
get everything straight and make sure it goes through smoothly.
And they don't want to have to deal with suppressors. They're tired of it. This is a drain on them, and at the end of the day, they signed up to go work on public safety, and they recognize that this isn't a public safety issue.
So we may get asked this later on. It just cropped in my mind. There was that white paper that got released. Is there any credibility to that was supposedly from internal ATF saying they want to get the suppressors out of their hands, they don't want to deal with them anymore?
Yeah, I mean, ATF doesn't want to deal with suppressors. And Ronald Turk was the #2 guy at ATF. It's not just some lowly staffer that's in the mailroom. This is a legitimate mover and shaker within the ATF. It's absolutely true that they don't want to deal with them. And it's our job to make sure that they don't have to.
It's a good advocate to have backing it.
Well, and I mean, I say that with the caveat of these guys can't advocate for something like that.
Sure, absolutely.
But I do think it's safe to say that they don't want to have to deal with it.
It's interesting to see that side of it anyways. You don't hear much about that too often. So we got a few great questions here. We'll dive into those. Again, we're live on Facebook. If you want to go ahead and shoot us some questions, we'd be happy to answer them, whether it pertains to suppressors themselves, the HPA, the Hearing Protection Act. We got Knox Williams here with the ASA answering questions. He's about as tuned in as anybody related to the HPA as anybody in the country. So we'll be happy to answer your questions. Debbie asks, how do you think Form 1s will be handled?
That's a good question. I don't have a concrete answer on that, but suppressors will still be, if passed as drafted and, with the technical amendments that we're working on, they will still be treated like a firearm.
Sure.
So it'll be the same process as building a firearm.
Okay, so maybe it could be similar to if somebody at home was building a firearm today, they'd have to follow the same guidelines.
Yeah.
Okay. Gabriel asks, who is pushing for Massachusetts, California, New York, and New Jersey to adopt this mindset? Anybody? What about the states, at the state level?
That's a great question. So we have a campaign that we're working on called No State Left Behind. We're working actively on legislation, to make suppressors legal in all 50 states for ownership and for hunting.
Yeah, just a year ago here in Iowa, the ASA was here and assisted in getting suppressors legalized in Iowa.
Yep.
You did that over to the east, and you're working on that in Illinois as well?
Once we get done with this, I'll be driving to Springfield, Illinois. I'll be there for a few days working suppressor bill out there. We have active legislation in Massachusetts, in California right now. I believe that there's 9 active bills that we're working.
Wow.
And we should have at least one more bill dropped within the coming days.
So you're actively working within the states, you're working in the states, at the same time you're trying to get the HPA passed at the federal level. Because if the HPA passed, would these states' laws restricting suppressors still be in play?
No, well yes, they would. So if the HPA passes, then states will still have discretion on suppressors.
Okay.
So they'll still be able to say, we don't want these to be legal. It will not make them legal in the 8 states where they're currently prohibited.
Sure.
And it certainly won't touch on any hunting related issues.
Yeah, so that's why it's so important to work at the state level, because this would be great if the HPA passed, but if your state restricts them still, you're going to be out of luck. So we got to do a lot of groundwork still on the local level.
Yeah, and right now, 42 states allow suppressor ownership, 40 states allow suppressor hunting. To give you an idea of how far we've come, when we formed in 2011, 39 states allowed ownership, and I believe 22 states allowed hunting. So there's been 3 states that have legalized it, including Iowa, for ownership, and 18 states that have legalized it for hunting.
Yeah. It's just great to get to this point. I never thought we'd actually be having the discussion to have it at the federal level, but it's a lot of progress in a short amount of time, to be sure. Jason asks, what can individuals do in their communities, states, to change perception of silencers to the everyday person?
That's another great question. Be a good steward, educate people, buy suppressors, take them out to the range. If you have people that are curious about them, take them shooting. When you're shooting at the range, you're almost certainly, I know for me, every time I go shooting at the range, when it's non-work related, people come up and say, oh, what's that? Is that legal? Like, how do you have that? Where's your class 3 license? It's like, whoa, slow down. So walk them through the basics and show them what suppressors really are. I think that, just letting people see them and hear them themselves is really a great way to get that light bulb to click.
Yeah, it's a lot like, I guess, firearms in general. Our community is great at that, about taking people to the range, educating them on safety, proper handling. The same thing goes for suppressors. Somebody's not just going to stumble into these things and be knowledgeable. You got to have a friend or someone you come across that's friendly and open about it and shares the information.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great piece of advice. David asks, should I wait for HPA to be repealed or should I continue going by the same standard? Should I buy now or should I wait for the HPA? That's David's question.
I would say buy now. I think it's basically a no loss proposition. Legislation takes time. Washington, D.C. moves at a glacial pace.
Yeah.
There's
no guarantees in this either.
There are none. Yeah. I feel pretty confident that we're going to be able to get this done, but at the end of the day, it's politics.
Yeah.
Anything can happen.
Yeah.
And to think that this is going to happen quickly, it's good to be optimistic, but you also have to be realistic.
Yeah. So and basically, too, if you purchase today, one, you can be certain that if for some reason the HPA falls through, you're going to get a suppressor. But then also, you're going to have a specific serial number to you that you're going to get. If it passes, that suppressor is waiting for you on the shelf.
Yeah. You've already purchased that. And I think that something that not a lot of people have considered is, if the Hearing Protection Act passes, there's going to be a mad rush to buy every suppressor that you can get. It's going to be the shortage, that we saw when Obama was elected, on accessories, magazines, .22 ammo, where you're literally having to basically bribe the guy at Walmart who receives the stuff to know when he's going to get it in so you can get your 50 rounds. If you don't know the right person, it's going to be much the same situation. Right now you've got several thousand suppressor dealers across the country. The Hearing Protection Act passes, you're going to have tens of thousands.
So you get this, I'm sure you've heard this, that maybe pushing for the HPA has maybe put people into putting off buying suppressors, and that's really dampened demand for suppressors in the industry. What do you say to that and the role that ASA has played in that?
I think that's part of it. I think that there's been a lot of people who have said, we told people it would pass in 100 days.
Yeah.
Look it up. We never said that.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, that's been pinned on us. Okay.
Yeah.
Market aversion from the Hearing Protection Act is definitely a real thing. But you also have to factor in things like, overall firearm sales are down, since Trump got elected. Everybody thought Hillary was gonna get elected, and we expected kind of the market during the Obama administration to stay the same, but there's no longer that panic, no longer that so-called necessity.
And there was a rule change last year too that caused a lot of people to front load maybe on suppressors they would have bought later on. Is that maybe a little bit of the dynamic too?
That's a huge part of it. Okay. So back in January of last year, the Obama administration announced their final ruling called 41F. Before that, it was called 41P, the proposal versus final. But in January, and people knew that it was going to take effect 6 months from that date. So July 13th was when it would take effect, and that amended the way that you can buy specifically with trusts. So you had 6 months of people going out and pretty much like a kid in a candy shop buying everything that they wanted, and that has had an impact on sales currently.
Sure.
Is this something that we want to see? Like, absolutely not. We'd love to see sales come back up, but I think those three things play equal roles.
Here's a take I have on it. If this is a great thing that could potentially happen, do we not want to push for this at some point? You'd want to push for it at some point. Now is an opportunity to do that. You don't put off a good opportunity like this.
This is the best opportunity that we've ever had. When we formed in 2011, we we thought, hey, do we want to push for this out of the gates? And the consensus was no. We want to build up and wait until we find the right moment to strike. And we feel that this is the right moment to strike. And we feel pretty happy that we have, a year and a half under our belt with the previous bill, not even including the 6 months it took to draft it, so that we at least have some of that education already done.
That's pretty great. We'll dive back into questions. We got a few here. Hopefully I didn't miss any. Got David's there. Jonathan asks, should we be calling committee members, asking for them to hear the bill and vote yes to put it to the floor? What should people be doing about it?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
I think.
Do you know what committee it is in right now?
Yeah. So on the House, it's joint, dual referred to Judiciary and to Ways and Means.
Okay.
In Judiciary, I think we have 18 co-sponsors out of 40 members.
Okay.
So we're doing pretty good on that. Can always do better. And I think that if people want to reach out to the committee members, Senate side, it's in Senate Finance. That's always a great idea. The more that they hear from you, the better. First and foremost, the most valuable communication that a person can make before they do anything else is reach out to your legislator. Legislators like to listen to the pulse of their constituents because those are the folks that are actually electing them.
Okay.
So that's going to be where you can have the largest value add. Once you've done that, go out and contact the committee members. And if you want to contact your legislator, we have a form on our website.
Okay, good.
You can actually go to hearingprotectionact.com and it'll take you to our site. And within 30 seconds, you enter your information and it'll populate your congressman and your 2 senators, and you'll be able to click submit. You can edit the letter if you want. You don't have to, but it will voice your support
that makes
of
it
the
pretty
Hearing
easy,
Protection Act. Yeah, super easy.
Awesome. So then it's in the Judiciary, and what was the other committee in the House?
Ways and Means.
Ways and Means. So if somebody has, say, their representative in one of those committees, it's very important for them to contact them. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Good to know. And then Brandon asks, what happens to the states that ban silencers unless transferred under federal provisions, i.e. Michigan? I think we hit on that a little bit, but basically state law. If a state has a law banning suppressors, it would still be in effect. Yeah,
so Michigan is a little bit strangely worded. That particular law is, and suppressors are legal there. But I think if I'm interpreting this question right, what you're saying is like, what about the states that refer to federal law? So if it's in compliance with the National Firearms Act,
that's what Michigan does. It says, oh, we just defer to federal law.
That I know that there's a lot of states that do it. We've identified, fuzzy on the numbers, but I believe 14 states that either reference the National Firearms Act or the NFRTR, which is the Federal Registry, and an additional 6 states where something could be an issue. And that was actually the reason it took us so long to draft the bill the first go round.
Okay.
We spent 6 months working with our attorneys, the NRA's attorneys, and legislative counsel through Representative Salmon's office. The folks who actually draft and stamp their approval on any legislation that's introduced, to figure out this particular issue, because we didn't want to introduce a bill that would make suppressors illegal in any of the states where they're currently legal.
Yeah.
So that was a non-starter. We had to figure that out before we introduced anything, and we got it figured out. There is language, I believe it's section 3, either 3 or 4. I could tell you if I had the bill in front of me, but that addresses that particular issue and makes sure that any state where they're legal, they will still be legal.
Okay, good.
Both anything possessed prior to HPA and anything purchased after.
It takes a lot of coordination because you're working with the NRA, you're working with the states, you're working with legislators to put these things together. It's not like you can just toss a bill together in Word and pass it along in an afternoon. It takes some time.
Some time and some thought.
Yeah.
But
I assume a lot of lawyers involved in consulting. I can see the pain in your eyes. There's another question, I believe from Brandon. Where do we find who the committee members are? How do you find out who's on what committee?
So I suppose we should probably put up a post on our website. We will get on that within the coming days. But honestly, you can Google it, Wikipedia.
Yeah. I think it's on congress.gov and a few of those sites. You can actually find the different committees and find them that way. That's a good place to start.
They all have their own websites too. Judiciary has its own website in the House.
I'm sure they're beautiful websites and they function well. Easy to find stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Let's hop into some of the other things here. We hit on it earlier that it's in the House and Senate. Can you elaborate and jump back into that specifically, and maybe time frame? I'm sure a lot of people are wondering how far out is this going to get voted on? What's it look like?
Sure, and you know, that's the $1 million question. That's a question that we wish that we knew too. You know, I don't know exactly when it's going to be heard, and I don't think that anybody that says, you know, it will be heard by X date is necessarily telling the truth at this point. That can change rapidly. I can tell you that we are working to try and get it heard as soon as possible. But you know, I also have to consider that there are a lot of things that Congress is working on right now. You know, currently the biggest issue that they're working on is, you know, the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, repeal and replace, and what's going to happen with that. So their bandwidth is largely eaten up by that, especially leadership who really has to make the decision of, is this bill going to get heard or not, and when is it going to happen? So
it's in these two committees right now. Once it gets out of those committees, does it then go up for a vote in the House?
If it passes both committees, it can.
Okay.
You know, it doesn't have to, but it can, and that's what we're pushing for.
All right, great. So no ETA right now, but it's working its way through.
It is working its way through. We're adding co-sponsors almost daily.
Is that the most important thing right now, just gathering those co-sponsors? Because the more you get, I assume the better.
That does help tremendously, especially when we're approaching leadership and saying, hey, we would like to move this bill. You know, if it has 10 co-sponsors, it's a lot less likely to move. And then if it has,
what's the number you're at right now?
121 in the House right now. Okay. And I know that there's a few that should be added here soon. Hopefully the snow will clear up.
And you mentioned a majority Republican, so you have a majority of the Republicans in the House on board?
We have over 50% of the House Republicans signed on as co-sponsors.
That's pretty good so far.
Yeah.
All right. Just to remind everyone, we are live. We're live with Knox Williams with the ASA, the American Suppressor Association. Pass along your questions in the comments below. We'd be happy to answer anything. If we don't get to it today, we'll respond back later, either Brownells or we'll reach out to Knox so you guys can answer it. So pass them our way. Questions about suppressors, how they work, and where the HPA is at, the Hearing Protection Act at the federal level. When's it happening? What's going on with it? Send those questions our way. Speaking of questions, Nathan asks, has the HPA had an impact on the suppressor industry so far?
Yes. Yeah, it has. Okay. You know, I think that there's a lot of excitement, but there's also a lot of people who are saying, you know, hey, I'm just going to wait until the Hearing Protection Act passes to go buy a suppressor. You know, we kind of touched on that earlier. Yeah. I would say two things to that person. One, if you haven't called and contacted, emailed your legislator, you're wrong. Yeah. You know, shame on you. Yeah. Two, if you really want a suppressor, go get a suppressor. Yeah. You know, you're probably going to be waiting for quite a while. You'll likely get your suppressor approved before the Hearing Protection Act passes. Yeah. And if you think you're going to be able to find a suppressor once the Hearing Protection Act passes for several years after it passes, you know, good luck. You know, they will become more available as supply meets demand, but initially that demand is going to skyrocket.
Let's jump back into maybe the basics of it, because I think we're talking sometimes at where things are and the state level. Let's talk about just basically what would the HPA do? Basically regulates a suppressor just like a rifle or a firearm, correct?
Yeah, so it removes suppressors from the National Firearms Act and treats them like a Title I firearm, so like a rifle or a shotgun, where you walk into a dealer, you fill out a 4473, which is your standard, you know, firearms transfer form. You submit to a NICS check. If you pass that NICS check, you're good to go. No tax, no fingerprints, no paperwork to ATF other than your standard, you know, transfer form, and you're good to go.
Basically, do away with the nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Those are my words. Anyways, so again, this cropped up for one listener. What can viewers do right now, and what should they tell their friends to do? What can they do to advocate the HPA being passed?
Go to hearingprotectionact.com, put in your information, and send the letter to your legislators, both, you know, your representative, the member of the House, and both senators. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell everybody to do it.
That first part's one, it's convenient. You just go to your site and fill out the form. The part that's going to take more effort on everyone's part is talking to friends and family members, community members about this.
But if this is something that you believe in, you know, go out and help us spread the word. You know, if we all work together, we will be able to get this done. I firmly believe that. But the quicker that we all work together and the more people that get involved in this fight, the faster that we'll be able to see results.
It doesn't happen in a vacuum. And they can also join the ASA. You've been kind of humble about this, but they can actually join the ASA too.
they absolutely can. You know, that helps keep us on the road. That helps keep us lobbying. You know, we're looking to hire more employees so that we can lobby more effectively. And you know, the more people that are involved in our association, the stronger our voice. Yep. You know, if we get more people to sign up, that's more representatives and members of Congress that we can say, hey, we have members in your district. Yep. You know, and it really helps us.
And you're working with a few other organizations as well. Yep. You've got the NRA working with you. You got what other organizations are partnering with the ASA to make it happen?
The NRA and the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. We've been working with them since day one, on both the state and the federal level. You know, and our relationship with those two groups is fantastic. You know, everybody knows about the NRA. A lot less people know about the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. Yeah. But I would say, you know, if you're interested in hunting and, you know, sportsmen's related advocacy, you know, the CSF is really one of those groups that's been working behind the scenes for years.
And let's maybe jump back. This is a good segue back to the states. What are some states you're working in right now, and are some groups maybe in those states you're working with?
Yeah, so still NRA, CSF, NSSF in some of those states as well, and on the federal level. But, you know, some of our biggest bills, you know, Illinois, I'll be heading there tonight, you know, to work for the next few days in Springfield. You know, we're working hand in hand with the NRA and you know, some of the in-state groups there. California, we just got a bill introduced. You know, and we have a lobbyist out there, and we've been working on that one, trying to set that legislation up for a couple of years. You know, working on Hawaii. Unfortunately, that bill didn't meet the committee hurdle that it needed to. It's not dead, but it won't be back up until next year. But we'll be working, you know, to educate legislators on that. Massachusetts, you know, we're working over there with the folks from GOL, Gun Owners Action League. You know, they're one of the state affiliates over there. You know, here in Iowa, last year we worked directly with the Iowa Firearms Coalition.
We had great guys help get that pass. Shout out to those guys at the IFC. That was cool to see happen. The bill for Iowa was actually signed right here on this desk here.
It was right about here.
Yeah, it's kind of in the Brownells store itself. So I was in the back doing my paperwork to get my 3 suppressors at the same time. We'll hop back to some questions here. Jason asks, how much support is the ASA getting from the NRA? Whose primary effort right now seems to be, they're saying the NRA's effort seems to be national concealed carry reciprocity and is far less concerned about suppressors. What would you say to that? Are you getting a lot of help from the NRA? What's the priorities?
You know, we don't take money from NRA, but we have absolutely been working with them on both the state and the federal levels. Concealed carry reciprocity is their #1 priority. You know, not gonna pretend that it's not, but the Hearing Protection Act is #2. You know, and I've seen them firsthand working this legislation, helping us push it, and I mean, they are as committed as anybody to seeing this through.
Cool. So NRA, they've come out obviously publicly. They've been pretty vocal about this. They've been supporting it, getting the good word out. So
absolutely,
that's good to see. I guess this is maybe an oddball question. You've seen some of the petitions on whitehouse.gov to repeal the Hughes Amendment, that sort of thing. What effect do you think those have on this movement and helping things?
I think it's drawing from a lot of the same people. You know, and I would say my caveat is, you know, to that petition to remove, you know, to eliminate the NFA. You know, it had 100,000 signatures in a matter of days.
Yeah, that's pretty great.
It is, you know, and it's something that, you know, as a person, you know, hey, that would be great. You know, as a lobbyist, I don't think that that's realistically going to happen at this point. You know, but I think that doing things like removing, you know, trying to remove suppressors from the NFA is a great first step. I just wish that those 100,000 people would also go out and contact their legislators on the Hearing Protection Act, because, you know, if they were all to do that and flood Congress, you know, Congress would take note. That's an actual piece of legislation that they can say, this is something we want you to support. You know, and that would be my challenge to the folks that are signing those petitions is sign the petition, you know, and send that correspondence to your legislators.
And I'm guessing a lot of them have. There's probably a lot of great crossover there. There's a lot of great, that's a great thing about our community. There's a lot of activism.
Absolutely.
A lot of people that are not afraid to have their voices heard. And it's a very good thing, in my opinion. Robert asks, can you make a suppressor at home if HPA passes? We hit on that very briefly. What are your thoughts there on how that would function?
Yeah, it'll be just like creating a firearm. You know, so you'll still have to register it and submit paperwork for it. And you know, I'm not entirely sure on the process. I'm not the most well-versed person on the process of how to build a firearm at home.
Okay.
But maybe that's something that you can kind of.
Yeah, well, today we sell, like, for instance, 80% receivers. As long as you manufacture it and it's only in your use, you can use it for yourself. There's no other paperwork required. So I would assume then that suppressors be the same way. That's just my assumption on that. But
yeah, and I need to get back to you with
speculation.
I believe that won't be the case.
Okay.
But yeah.
Something to dig into anyways.
Absolutely.
Good question. So we've covered most of the HPA. Is there anything, I guess, what we should expect in the coming weeks or months with the HPA? Any news we might hear out of it, or?
Hopefully, we'll be getting a committee hearing scheduled.
Okay.
We're working to try and set up some demonstrations for legislators.
Okay.
That's our number one goal.
So demonstrations maybe in DC, or okay.
Yeah,
that'd be pretty neat.
That's something that on the state level, when we work, we almost always at any opportunity get legislators out and take them shooting.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why we've seen pretty tremendous bipartisan support.
So when you say demonstration, you're not talking out there with signs and things. You're talking about actually taking the legislators out to the range and shooting. Okay.
Yeah, letting them pull the trigger and shoot a firearm, hear unsuppressed gunfire, and then put the suppressor on, let them hear it suppressed, so that they can go back and say, I've actually heard it. Here's my tacit knowledge, as opposed to, well, I'm pretty sure I know, what it is. I've seen them in the movies. That's just not real.
Yeah. That'd be pretty great too. And we got a range down here if you need to use it.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Got a few other questions rolling in. Again, we're here live with Knox Williams with the ASA, the American Suppressor Association, answering your questions. We're going to be live for a bit longer, so send your questions our way. We'd be happy to answer them to the best of our abilities. Thanks for joining us again, Knox.
Yeah.
It's pretty great to have you here. What is the current wait time for a suppressor and the current process? How does that compare to the wait time after? I guess in general, what's the wait time of purchasing a suppressor right now?
So when we sat down with ATF most recently, a few weeks ago, they told us it was 8 months. And that's where they're trying to keep it at.
From the time someone submits their Form 4, sends off their $200 tax, they're waiting 8 months before they receive it back in their store.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's a general, about 8 months is what it's taking. If and when the Hearing Protection Act passes, you won't have a wait time. It'll be as long as it takes to fill out your 4473 and pass the next check.
So I could, if the HPA passes, just assuming, I could walk into Brownells store, pick out this suppressor, fill out a 4473, and walk out the same day, probably in a half hour with this suppressor.
Absolutely.
Okay. Or you can buy it on Brownells.com and have it shipped to your dealer. That'd be nice too. All right, so that'd be a pretty nice deal. And that's really what it's all about, removing the stuff that's perceived by many to be really unnecessary. It's bad for the consumer. We see that on our side directly. It's not a good customer experience. It's frustrating. It's confusing. For a first-time buyer, for those of us acquainted, it's pretty straightforward. But for a first-time buyer, it's intimidating.
It's that first time going through the process where it's really daunting. After that, it clicks and it makes sense. It doesn't mean that it's a good process.
Yeah.
It's antiquated. It's as much as the folks at Martinsburg at the NFA branch, they really do try to process these paperwork.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they've only got so many people, and they've got, too many forms, and their workload is just too big. But it's a poor process. It's something that needs to be changed.
And with the HPA, there's still a background check. There's still a background check in there, built in, just like you would. There'd be a next check, just like buying a normal firearm.
Absolutely.
All right. We've got a few more questions here. Alexander asks, if I were to make one at home, what part gets registered? And that's a part we probably weren't 100% sure on. But maybe today, I guess you could say today you could speak to that. What's the registered part of a suppressor?
So generally it's the outer tube. It's an externally visible part, and they've got depth requirements for how deep you have to mark it. So you can't just mark it and then rub it off and have it an unserialized suppressor. But that's one of the technical amendments that we've been working on, is the definition of what we're going to be calling a keystone part. So a part that you have to have in order to assemble or use a suppressor.
So that's part of your technical package then, is clearly defining what actually could constitute the suppressor itself.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's ridiculous that suppressor parts are currently considered a suppressor. So like baffles, it's hard to get replacement baffles. It's hard to to really purchase anything that doesn't have a dual purpose.
Yeah.
You know,
and
when
from
you're
my
talking about
understanding,
explosive
it makes it difficult for manufacturing, because if you're going to source out the components, the person you're sourcing from has to be an SOT as well, correct? Is that?
Yeah,
Is that?
yeah,
Okay.
pretty much. And it's, you know, it's just ridiculous, and it's just more burdens for people that are trying to, you know, and do, you know, abide by the law, but it's just unnecessary, and it has zero public safety enhancement.
So that's maybe the thing on the side that's maybe not getting as much attention about the HPA, is you're working on this technical things to clear up a lot of baggage with the HPA that'll go along with as amendments, correct?
Yeah, that's part of our amendment package that, you know, it's going to be offered up whenever it gets heard in committee. You know, a lot of this stuff we've been working directly with the ATF on. You know, we don't want to, you know, share too much information until we have.
I was just going to ask, is that something that you'll release ahead of time, or probably as it goes?
Probably as it goes.
Okay.
You know, because we want to make sure that we've got it locked in, airtight, and that there's not any issues.
But I assume it'd probably make a lot of people happy that are familiar with suppressors, clearing up a lot of the stuff that they've been dealing with for a long time. That's
Absolutely.
great.
Okay. These amendments are going to strengthen this bill.
All right. Good to know. All right. Let's see. We got a few questions back there. David asks, any notable support across the aisle that we can contact and praise for their bipartisan efforts? I think what David is referring to is Democrats. Yeah.
So right now we've got Gene Green, who's the co-chair of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, Democrat from Texas.
Okay.
I believe that we've got at least a couple more Democrats that should be signing on here shortly. Right now he's the only Democrat that is signed on. Last year we also had Peter DeFazio from Oregon, and we're working to get him signed back onto the bill. I would expect that when we can take some more legislators out to the range and let them shoot, that we will see more bipartisan support. It's just tricky. You know, from our vantage point, this shouldn't be a party line issue.
Yeah. And having individuals contact their representatives too. If your representative is a Democrat, reach out to them, give them a call.
100%.
Show up at their office.
Let them know that this is something that matters to you, because they likely think that it's not. You know, a lot of legislators, you know, even if we can get Democrats to vote for the bill, you know, are hesitant to sign on as co-sponsors because they're afraid of what it will mean for their re-election campaign. So let them know, you know, especially on the Senate side.
And how do you recommend approaching people? I think the IFC here in Iowa has been great about this as far as how you conduct yourself talking to a legislature, just kill them with kindness, essentially. Is that how you kind of recommend if you're reaching out to these people?
Professionalism goes a long way. If you're crude and you know, you're digging at them, that's the quickest way to get anything that you're saying thrown right out the window. It's not productive, and it might feel good at the time, but it's not actually helping anything. So be kind, be professional, and be concise. You know, that's really one of the reasons why we have the letter written on our website. You know, we hit the talking points that we want to, and if you want to tweak it, it's fully editable. But make sure that you know, keep it within the lines, and you know, don't say something that you wouldn't you know, say to your mother. You know.
that might be scary for some people. But, all right, so basically treat them professionally as a person, as you'd like to be treated. It goes a long way. We've seen that here locally with a lot of success.
Absolutely.
Brandon asks, could you speak to the decibel levels? Getting back to some technical information. Can you speak to decibel levels of suppressed centerfire firearms versus an everyday item, say a jackhammer, hands clapping, things people can relate to?
Yeah, so you know, unsuppressed, pretty much any centerfire rifle is going to be over that, you know, magic line of 140 decibels, which OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, you know, delineates as the quote hearing safe level for an impulse noise. You know, to kind of take a step back on decibel levels and what is a decibel, what does that mean? You know, it's basically a measurement of sound and like the energy that sound wave is creating. You know, OSHA actually defines, they start regulating sounds at 85 decibels. So you can safely expose yourself according to them. Basically think if you're like a machine shop worker or something like that, they're thinking kind of in the workplace. But to certain decibel levels for certain periods of time safely without requiring hearing protection. At 85 decibels, you can safely expose yourself for 8 hours. Decibels are not linear, they're logarithmic, and every 3 decibels that you increase, you're actually doubling the sound level.
So, for example, what's 85 decibels? What would that be? Like loud music, or what is that?
Yeah, conversation, rolling, driving down the highway with your window down. You know, not hearing brakes screeching and stuff like that. But
And say a centerfire rifle, for example, a quiet, like a 300 blackout suppressed. What's that decibel
with
range?
the suppressor, realistically, you're looking, best case, 115, 120 decibels.
Okay.
It's louder than a jackhammer.
And you said about 140 is that safe level, OSHA?
Okay, so yeah, so you take that 85 decibels for 8 hours, add 3 decibels, so 91 decibels you can safely expose for 4 hours, 94 for 2 hours, up and up and up until you hit a fraction of a
I got
second.
ahead of myself. All right.
Yeah, for that 140 decibel threshold. You know, you still shouldn't expose yourself to noises that are that loud very often without hearing protection, but that's kind of the magic line in the sand, so to speak. You know, it's something that if you're going out and you're hunting and it's at 139 decibels, take a shot or two, like no big deal.
Yeah.
If you go out and shoot 1,000 rounds, yours are probably going to ring.
Yeah.
But for a centerfire rifle, you know, you think like a 308 or 30-06. It depends on what kind of rifle you're using, how long's your barrel, what type of ammo, do you have a muzzle brake? Because muzzle brakes actually amplify the sound and direct it right back at the
Probably
shooter's
your
face.
altitude and your conditions and all that stuff.
There's a whole lot of variables, but by and large, for your hunting calibers and 223 and stuff, we've actually measured between 150 to in excess of 185 decibels. Wow. And you know, you look at that higher end. That was an SBR. I think it was an 8-inch 5.56 rifle with the muzzle brake, and at 185 decibels, even if you have earplugs in and earmuffs on top of them, and you have a proper seal, which the majority of people that wear hearing protection are not actually getting a proper seal.
Especially if you have glasses, like
you're breaking that seal. You've got 4 small holes. Even if you're doing everything right, you're still not adequately protecting yourself. You're still a little bit over that 140 decibel level because it's not 30 decibel reduction from earplugs and 30 decibel from earmuffs doesn't equal 60 decibels of reduction. You hit diminishing returns as you couple them up.
So you're talking anywhere from like 170 to 185 is like what a rifle might be, and with a suppressor, you reduce it to 140 or under.
That's the goal, right? Like, and different suppressors and different hosts with different ammo types.
And you got to know your ammunition and your setup, to make it work. Okay. So that's the whole goal here, is actually getting it to that hearing safe range and make these actually usable without being concerned about your health.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you know, regardless of what decibel they actually reduce it to, it's still diminishing your exposure to a dangerous noise level. You know, if you expose yourself to noises that are that loud, which you are going to be very hard pressed to find in any other setting outside of, you know, the firearms world, you know, you're damaging your hearing permanently. And once damaged, you're not getting it back. You know, you can experience some temporary threshold shift, which, you know, is basically your ears ring for a few days and it kind of fades away. But if you're hearing ringing, you know, you're permanently damaging your hearing.
Are you taking that approach at the federal level as a health benefit? Are you taking that angle? Or?
Absolutely, because it is. You know, this is something that can reduce people's exposure to these dangerous noises. And you know, you look at the facts. You know, our opposition has tried to, you know, poke at us and say, oh,
is there a big opposition?
There is. You know, there's folks like Senator Murphy, Senator Gillibrand, Gillibrand from New York, out there saying, you know, hey, we're just fabricating this health issue. But you know, let's dive into some of the facts. Multiple studies have shown that 70 to 80% of hunters never wear hearing protection. Not like sometimes, literally 0% of the time they wear hearing protection.
We all know people like our parents' age probably who never have.
And that's one of the things that we do when we interact with legislators, especially in a large group. It's, you know, hey, who among us is hunters? And a lot of the times, you know, the folks that we deal with are hunters. Raise your hand. Okay, take a look around the room. How many of you wear hearing protection when you hunt with firearm? Very few hands go up.
I've never seen anybody do it.
Yeah, exactly. And every time you pull the trigger, you're damaging your hearing. It's not a question of if, it's how much. And a lot of people take the mentality of, it's just one shot, how bad can it be? Well, I mean, if you want to wear hearing aids, it's not that bad, but I don't want to wear hearing aids, you know? And I don't think that the general public should really be forced to choose between, do I want to be able to hear my surroundings and safely hunt because I want to interact and hear if there's other hunters in the woods or people nearby.
That's a big safety issue too, just knowing if other hunters are around.
And you know, you can debate, okay, well, yes, there are hearing protection devices that are available. There's electronic earplugs and earmuffs, and that's all good, fine. but it doesn't count for anything if people aren't using it.
Yeah.
You know, that approach it's kind of the abstinence approach.
That's interesting. I had no idea there was opposition out there to this. It's so common sense to us, I guess, or to me. Wow, crazy. Yeah, again, we're here with Knox Williams with the ASA. We're answering questions regarding suppressors themselves. If you have questions on how they function, ins and outs, anything related to suppressors, we'd be happy to answer those. But also questions related to the Hearing Protection Act, which is at the federal level right now in the House and a few committees. Is that right? Yep.
And the Senate, yeah.
Okay, and introduced in the Senate. So some exciting stuff going on. Knox has the inside scoop on that and is happy to answer your questions. And speaking of questions, how does Europe view suppressors? Are they as a courtesy? Sounds like somebody has some insight on Europe and wants to kind of highlight that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on the country. Different countries treat them differently. Germany actually recently just legalized them for hunting purposes. But you look at places like the UK, where it's very hard to buy a firearm. Almost every single hunting rifle has a suppressor, or as they call it, a moderator, you know, on the rifle. You know, they are ahead of the curve in that they recognize that this actually has a hearing safety and health benefit, and it also has a benefit of being a good steward to the environment and to your neighbors.
Why is that? Is that because of just the amount of people in a closed-in space, you think, or why do you think that
That's
history
part
is
of
there?
it. Also, you know, when the EU formed, you know, they were looking at, you know, hey, how can we decrease potential health costs, because, you know, we've basically got socialized medicine, you know, across Europe. So it's a pragmatic approach to it. You know, it's interesting that so much of our opposition, you know, is you know, so tightly vested in you know, universal health care, yet they want to do everything that they can to make sure that sportsmen and women don't have a basic tool to help protect their hearing.
That's been a reason for law enforcement for a while, I believe, is when you pitch it to a law enforcement department, is you're going to save in health costs down the road with your officers. They're not going to have hearing damage 20 years down the road and you're going to have to pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely, and the military as well. You look at the VA and the top two disability claims: tinnitus and noise-induced hearing loss. You know, tinnitus being the ringing in your ears. We spend billions of dollars. I think, like, actual estimates, official estimates from several years ago were $2.2 billion. When we spoke with the director, one of the guys who heads up the hearing loss program for the Office of Naval Research, he'd estimated it closer to $4 billion.
Wow.
You know, and that's not only a burden on taxpayers, but it's also, we're sending our warfighters overseas knowing that they're going to come back with hearing-related disabilities because of small arms fire.
I know, like, special forces units will get them, but it's not even a commonly issued item. I for sure never saw anything like that.
Yeah, outside of, you know, sniper teams and things like that, and special forces.
Yeah, that'd be great to catch on. Eric asks, do you think it has enough support to pass? There's a simple question there.
I think we're getting there.
Okay.
You know, if it was going for a straight up and down vote, I think the House certainly. I think that, you know, the Senate is really where the rubber's going to have to meet the road. I think that we will get there. You know, at the end of the day, once we can educate folks, you know, this is a real common sense issue. You know, once you take away all of the stigma and the myths and misconceptions, and actually get people educated on it, you know, there will be your hardliners who are opposed to anything gun related. That's fine. But I think that there are enough people, you know, and hopefully I'm not giving Congress too much credit, but I think that there are enough members of Congress to see the merits of this. And
it's by no means a sure thing. Strange things can happen. Who knows, you know, 3 months from now, 4 months from now, whenever it might happen. But it's great to get to this point anyways and have a shot at it.
Absolutely.
Mike asks, how often should I clean my silencer? I guess it might depend on which one. Do you want to run through that real quick?
Sure. So, you know, if it's anything other than a 22, make sure your interface is clean. You know, so if it's a handgun suppressor, you know, clean your pistons, clean the threads on your firearm.
Basically where it attaches to the firearm.
Okay. Make sure that's clean and good, and you should be pretty well good to go. For 22 long rifle, that's really about the only suppressor that you should regularly take apart, disassemble, and clean. I
see a lot of manufacturers recommend like every 250, 500 rounds. Is that about what you hear most guys saying? Disassemble?
Yeah, and it depends. You know, I would say go by whatever the manufacturer of your suppressor recommends.
Okay.
Because it'll be different for
different
folks.
They might know what they're talking about.
Yeah. You know, I don't remember the last time I took apart my suppressors, but probably should. But nonetheless, 22 long rifle is dirtier.
It's a big one.
Yeah.
And now I see this question crop up quite a bit is, well, when you're cleaning it, I guess it probably go by the manufacturer's recommendations, but most people recommend with a brush and some solvent, clean it that way by hand.
Yep.
Usually the most common.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Again, we're answering questions related to the Hearing Protection Act. We have Knox Williams with the ASA here. Happy to answer your questions. We'll be live for a little bit longer, so send your questions our way. If we don't catch it today, we'll catch it later in the comments. We'll respond directly back to you, either Brownells or Knox. I'm sure you yourself will respond back to them. And this is also going to be posted on YouTube later. So if you're just catching us now, you want to get caught up, it'll be on YouTube later, or you can, of course, go back and watch it right here on Facebook. Either one's great. Let's see where I'm at here. Let's see. Oh, and I'm getting reminded here, we actually just put up a suppressor video from, I believe, Gemtech. Alexander joined us. So if you want to check out how to clean your suppressor, check out that video series. It's on YouTube right now. Brownells is a stream there, so check that out. Pretty good.
Awesome.
I'm actually in some of them too, so you'll enjoy that. All right, so we're still answering a few more questions. Send them our way. Pretty exciting stuff. We covered the state level. A lot of exciting stuff there. You're headed to Illinois next. Maybe you could elaborate a bit more on Illinois. What's going on there?
Sure. So, we were pretty close to getting that done back in January during the end of actually last year's session. It didn't end until the second week of January. We were a concurrence vote away. We thought we were going to get it done, and it didn't. Just couldn't quite clear that last hurdle. Mm-hmm. Bill's been reintroduced, Senate Bill 50, and we're working directly with NRA and some other groups out there to try and push it. Get it across the finish line this year.
What's their legislature look like? What's it look like, Democrat, Republican? What's the mix? Do you have any idea?
Very Democratic. Yeah.
Okay.
Our bill sponsor is actually Democrat, both on the House and the Senate side. Bill Hand in the Senate and Representative Phelps.
So it's common for this type of issue to be a bipartisan
Absolutely.
topic. All right.
Yeah. And that's something that shocks a lot of people. This is not party line issue, especially at the state level.
Yeah.
Where we've been working on this for so long, it really can transcend that. Which just makes it unique for a firearms issue, which is one of the reasons why we think it has such a high likelihood of passage on the federal side.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you were going to demonstrate suppressors for some federal level legislators, senators, representatives. When might that happen? Is that going to be a publicized event, or what are you going to try and do?
Likely not. That'll probably be private.
Okay.
Generally, when we host legislative demos, it's not something where we want 200 people.
You don't want them
there.
that maybe is on the fence. You don't want them to get a photograph with a suppressor and it gets out to their concern. Is that a concern, or what's the concern there?
Partially, we just want to be able to control the event, right? And if we open it up to the public, it makes it a lot harder for us to maintain control
and
over
get your point across to
exactly.
Gotcha.
We want it to be specifically focused on legislators, so that we can spend our entire time educating them, showing them the difference between unsuppressed versus suppressed. From 22 long rifle all the way up to 308 with 12 gauges, handguns, rifles, you name it. We want them to get the full picture. We have nothing to hide.
Is that something where you travel, say you're trying to get the HPA passed at the federal level, are you traveling to individual representatives, locations in their states, or are you going to host something there kind of in the DC area to demo
We
this?
do some traveling in that regard. Most of our travel and our demonstrations that we do traveling are for state level legislation.
Okay.
We're working to do it in DC.
So that's kind of one of the quiet things ASA does then, is you actually go out and put on demos, and you're kind of quietly doing it under the radar. Not a lot of people are probably hearing about that.
We've done dozens of demonstrations across the country, and we work on existing events like the Congressional Sportsman's Foundation, for instance. They host in May a legislative shoot. It's a shotgun only shoot, but in Maryland, which is very close to the district, at the PG County range, and they let us bring a half dozen suppressors out there every year. They have another shoot in August for staffers. So we've shown suppressors to dozens of members of Congress that otherwise would never have seen them.
You probably get a lot of interest too when they hear they can go shoot a suppressor. You probably get a good turnout, I would think.
Absolutely.
I know when I hear about that, I want to go.
Yep.
That's cool. So again, we're taking questions. If you have questions about the HPA, suppressors in general, we'll be happy to answer just about anything. Lawrence asks, which suppressors offer the least gas blowback? Is there variability between suppressors? I'm sure each manufacturer has certain claims or that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm going to probably take my hands off that because
Okay.
I don't want to appear to favor any one suppressor manufacturer over another.
Yep.
We're here to represent everybody. So I would defer that to you.
Yeah, so there's a lot of good resources out there to find out about suppressors. One, you can check out our site. We carry quite a few different suppressors, about 8, I don't even know the brands now, 8 to 10 different brands, all the major ones. We're adding suppressors all the time. So you can check that out. Of course, there's a lot of good resources on YouTube. But I couldn't speak to that one specifically. I haven't by any means shot everyone either. So it's one of my goals in life, I guess, to get there. So it looks like we're through about all the questions there. Again, if you have questions and we didn't get to them, I apologize. We'll get to them in the comments if you're late to the party or you're just asked them now. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Knox, I appreciate you coming here. This has been pretty informative. I learned a little bit about the inner workings of how things get done.
Paul, it's always a pleasure, man. Thank you for having me.
One, we appreciate your work here in Iowa, helping the bill get passed last year. That's appreciated, and we appreciate your work today at the federal level. So again, thanks. Thanks everyone for joining us. Again, if you are just tuning in now or you missed us, tune into YouTube. We're going to have this uploaded later. Of course, you can rewatch it again on Facebook. If you want to learn about suppressors, check out Brownells.com. Also check out the Brownells YouTube page. A lot of great resources there. If you frankly just want to talk to a person, give our tech line a call. It's a free service we offer. We got a few great guys down there. They'd be happy to talk suppressors with you if you have questions on how to mount a suppressor, how to clean it, anything like that. They'll be glad to help. Again, thanks everyone. We'll see you again next time.